Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniegolu. The president of Niger has paid tribute to the 71 soldiers killed on Tuesday in the country's worst ever jihadist attack. At a military air base in the capital Niamey, Mahamadou Issoufou described the incident as a dark day and a terrible ordeal for the army. On the ground were rows of body bags, each one covered by Niger's orange, white and green flag. The Islamic State West Africa province, or ISWAP, says it carried out the attack on a military base near the border with Mali, putting the number of soldiers they claim to have killed at more than 100, but it's simply not possible to verify this. There's been strong reaction to the deadly attack from inside Niger.
It is a reaction of profound sadness because it is the heaviest loss that the Niger army has ever suffered since the beginning of the crisis. It is as if an entire unit of our army has been completely destroyed. It's very serious.
Everyone talks about it. Ah, yes. But where are the drones? Where are the fighter planes? Where are these or those people? Well, these people are not here for us. It has become very clear to us, and so these foreign forces are not very effective. They have to leave.
Well, for more on that jihadist attack in Niger and its wider implications for security in the Sahel and the rest of West Africa, I'm joined now in the studio by retired Air Commodore Darlington Abdullahi, who is the Vice President of the Alumni Association of the National Defense College in Nigeria, and by the safety and security analyst Vince Onyekwelu, who is a former British police officer. And we're also joined from our studios in London by the international security analyst David Otto. I hope you can hear me, David. Good to have you there. I'll start with you. Just tell us what you know about what happened in Niger.
This attack which happened on the 10th, that's about 3 days ago, it's a demonstration of, the power of the Islamic State linked ISWAP, which now operates not just within the Lake Chad region, but, as we've seen in Niger and Mali, linking up with other jihadist organizations that are linked to not just local groups, but to Al-Qaeda as well. I mean, what happened in this particular incident in Inet, which is about a couple of kilometers, away from Niamey, which is the capital of Niger, is that jihadists mounted a fierce attack against, a well-fortified military camp, by Nigerien. I mean, often confused with Nigeria, but Nigerian forces. The numbers we are getting now, Charles, is that about 71 soldiers, were killed. But it's very difficult, as you mentioned, to verify these numbers. But this is a demonstration that the jihadists, have, gained more capacity within the region, and this is really going at breakneck speed. Something really needs to be done because 2020 is not looking good for the region, as far as this jihadist ability to carry out attacks against military posts is concerned.
Okay, stay with us, David, because we will obviously be talking with you some more. But let me come straight away to you, Air Commodore Darlington Abdullahi. What does this attack say about Niger's armed forces' ability to counteract attacks in the area? Do they have the operational capacity to face such attacks?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's more of serious issue indicating that there is a decreasing level of capacity on the side of the Nigerian forces, and not just in that area, but also it clearly indicates that the ISWAP group is having an increasing not just population but power, military strength and so on, equipment and all that, to be able to not just attack the Nigerian forces but also the French forces as well, as it happened earlier. And it has much wider implications, just beyond the killing, for the future, because the morale of the troops on ground is seriously affected. A lot of, fear in those ones, considering what the other forces are facing, and it stretches across the Sahelian area, not just Niger alone. And for us in Nigeria, it shows that we have bigger problems coming as well, because of the porous border and all those challenges that we've had along, and the fact that they have access to weapon systems, sophisticated weapon systems that they are employing. And so killing of over 70 soldiers is not anything to play with. It's very serious.
No, you're absolutely right. And let me bring the safety and security analyst Vince Onyekwelu in. Just as the Air Commodore was saying there, it's absolutely really quite alarming and quite worrying that, in that region you've got 5,000 French troops operating. You've got a United Nations huge budget. Does this attack suggest that the army, let's just take the Nigerian army first, doesn't control the situation as well as it would want to?
I think you need to appreciate the fact that apart from having about 5,000 French soldiers on ground, we also have about 14,000 UN troops on ground. But the question here is, what is the ungoverned spaces? What is happening to the ungoverned spaces over there? Now you have this huge, very lucrative Mauritania to Sudan Sahel region. Now there are different kinds of transnational criminals that are attracted to such areas. The people that would deal on drugs want to come to that place.
That's a good point.
The people that want to deal on cattle rustling want to come to that place.
So basically that entire border area is rife with criminality, basically.
Transnational criminals are coming in and they love to exploit. They have communication systems to know where can we exploit. And right there in the north there, you have Libya, a huge space that is yet to be ungoverned. So the truth is the blame should be on the French forces. But personally, I have more interest to ask, what is the 14,000 UN peacekeeping force?
Because we haven't actually heard much from them at all. You hear of the French, but you don't hear anything about them.
And they are there, and it's not the first time that innocent, unarmed citizens have been killed across Africa, and they are there standing there. When you have violent armed criminals killing innocent, unarmed people. So the question should be, economic part. French, what is your financial benefits to all this? Because there's a lot of gold mining. Criminal gold miners are also operating in that region.
Well, we'll get to talk a little bit about the presence of international so-called peacekeepers in that region. But let me bring David Otto back in. David, you and I have talked many, many times. You have expertise and a unique knowledge of these groups that operate across sort of Africa, particularly in the Sahel and around Nigeria. What more do we know about the identity of the attackers? We know they are ISWAP, and we know they're called terrorists, but more do we know about them?
Of course, we are aware that the Islamic State of West African Province, which is the Al-Banawi branch, which emanates from the original Shekau's Boko Haram faction, has claimed responsibility. But what we have to also take into context is that there are so many other jihadist groups that are now coordinating and collaborating with each other within that region. So even though the Islamic State of West African Province may have taken the victory for, if you want to call it that, for this attack, what we have to also take into context is that there are other groups within the region that they are liaising with. But what is really concerning is that you have a U.S. base, which a U.S. drone and intelligence base, which is in Niger, and one would have expected that they would have picked up intelligence. Mind you, these groups travel miles upon miles in order for them to carry out their attacks. The question is, why is it that, upon all the time that they were traveling, there were no drones to spot them? You've got thousands, of French forces that are operating within that region. So what happened? Did anyone from the local communities along the line, when these groups were traveling, did no one call the authorities to hint them about the progress in the attack? And so there are so many questions which gives an indication that while some are there to fight jihadist organizations genuinely, others are there to ensure that the group continues to thrive. So the onus is on the Nigerian authority to look into its internal counterterrorism strategy. I mean, they were meant to have this meeting in Paris, a couple of days in front. That was on the 16th of this month of December. That has now been cancelled, by President Macron because of the recent attack. And the French are still proposing to bring another jihadist coalition, which they call a European jihadist coalition, called Operation Takuba, which it's a Tamalek, local language for sand, or sab in French. So there is more military and expenditures being pumped into the hard strategy. The French are coming in, the European Union is there, the UN is there. It's chaos, not just in terms of what they're trying to do there, but they are not given the opportunity for local capacity building. And these small African countries, comparatively to the French and other European states, are actually getting the brunt of it. Africa Union needs to take its position, Charles, in order for this to, have some sense, if I may say.
Okay, let me bring Air Commodore Darlington Abdullahi in. We've got less than a minute before we have to take a break, so if you keep the answer fairly brief. I mean, he's talking about the onus being on Niger. I mean, it's got to defend its own borders. What sort of aid and support is Niger getting to support the country in this fight against these sorts of attacks?
Yeah, first I think there has to be a switch from peacekeeping to peace enforcement, because there's a limit to which the peacekeepers can go in circumstances of this nature. So
that's a good point.
That switch is very important at this point. Also, there is a huge gap in governance. The people, talked about the people now. What makes it possible for the people to either join them or make it easier for the coercion?
Right, okay. I'm just going to ask you to hold that thought. I'll come back to you in a minute. We've got to take a break. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our discussion about that massive jihadist attack in Niger and its implications for security in the Sahel and beyond. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniekolo. Now, this week in Niger, the Islamic State Group said it carried out the attack on a military base which left more than 70 soldiers dead and dozens of others wounded or missing. The soldiers were ambushed and attacked by gunmen in a military base along the border with Mali and Burkina Faso. It was a massive attack, the worst in the country's history. And it's come in the context of rising tensions with France, which has committed thousands of troops to try and fight the tide of Islamist insecurity in the countries of the Sahel. In the past week, President Macron issued a stark ultimatum in the form of a question. Did the leaders of the region want French troops on their soil or not? That question may have been answered to some extent by this attack, but the French meeting the president called has been postponed.
Nous devons, à très court terme,
we must in the very short term reclarify the framework and the political conditions of our intervention in the Sahel, first and foremost, with the 5 African states members of the G5 Sahel. I expect them to clarify and formalize their demands towards France and the international community. It is for all these reasons and in order to carry out these clarifications that I invited to Pau on December 16th the 5 African heads of states concerned and involved in the G5 Sahel, so they can provide specific answers on these points.
The French President Emmanuel Macron there. And with me in the studio, retired Air Commodore Darlington Abdullahi, who is the Vice President of the Alumni Association of the National Defense College in Nigeria, the Safety and Security Analyst Vince Onyekwelu, who is a former British police officer, and we're also joined from our London studios by the International Security Analyst David Otto. And straight away to you, Commodore Abdullahi, it doesn't look good at all, does it? There are multinational forces in that area. There are about 5,000 French troops in the Sahel and $1 billion spent in the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali and the Sahel every year. Yet this is happening along the Mali border, and these militants appear to be using this border area to their advantage.
Yeah, well, it's expected when some nations fail to develop their own capacity to cope with internal challenges within and also collaborate to deal with international, transnational challenges, just as we're seeing. Within their own internal territory, you wonder whether the people are willing to give information, as to the movement of this, because they couldn't have gotten there just within a very short period. It takes quite some time. So that information gap, could be disastrous, and so on. And the fact that so many countries, particularly in this area, have depended for too long on other countries to support them, So like Obama once stated, you don't go for aid with a view to continually going for the same aid. There has to be a limit to it. Develop your own capacity to be able to deal with some of these challenges. And this is worse in the sense that, at the moment, because like the Nigerian forces, they are split. So many of them are with the G5 force, some with the multinational joint task force. With other countries in Nigeria and all that, as well as facing massive internal security challenges. And to deal with this, I think violent extremism is an area that they really have to deal with, in terms of religion and economy, religious and economic fronts, particularly the economic front now, because so many people have been subjected to situations in which they probably have no option than join some of these groups, because the groups actually are known to have taken better care of some of these people than even the government itself. Right. And also, these are some of the challenges that need to be addressed.
And let me bring Vince Onyekwelu in, because of course what happens in the Sahel affects the rest of the Sahel. If it happens in Mali or Niger or Burkina Faso, it has a knock-on effect. So it seems as if security is getting worse in places like, in all three countries, in fact. But if it's that bad in Niger, then it's likely to be getting bad as well in Mali and Burkina Faso. We know that in the last couple of months, more than 250 soldiers have been killed in all three countries.
Exactly. Remember, on Monday, before this major attack, there was another attack on Monday. Where about 12 people were injured. Remember, on the 29th of May this year, there was an attack. July this year, there was a similar attack. About 50 soldiers were killed. One good thing I've picked up from this scenario is the Niger Republic, no matter how poor they are, they have been very fair and transparent with the numbers of their dead soldiers. We have to pick that. We take care of victim care, to take care of the relatives of the dead soldiers. So that's very key, to keep data. Data is key in all this we are doing. Another thing we need to pick up about is porous borders. Because if these borders are porous, people keep moving across this border. They need to secure their borders. Yeah. And then these 5 G5 presidents, they need to ask themselves questions. What makes you a president? What makes you a leader? You can't just rely on France and the UN to help you. Sit down together, plan on how to save lives and properties of your people and bring an end to this attack. Not always defending or blaming the French, but you need to sit down and ask yourself, they elected me to protect lives and properties. What can we do better with this to save more lives and property?
Well, let me bring David Otto in, because yes, Vince is right that I think you mentioned that earlier, David, the onus, of course, on the Nigerians to defend themselves. Nevertheless, they've got all this concentration of troops and peacekeeping money. What is it about all that that's not adding up to security for the people in the region?
You're very correct. They have resources from the multinational joint task force, which coordinates with the Lake Chad region. Nigeria is one of them. Cameroon is one of them. They've got help from the recently created G5 Sahel, which is backed by France. You also have Operation Barkhane, and now the French are proposing Operation Takuba. You've got the European Union. You have the United Nations. And the reason why nothing is really working is because of all this, juxtaposition of multinational help that, normally doesn't trickle down to, the impact of what is happening within the local communities. And that is why you would have this kind of attack in Luptako Goma area in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, where terrorist organizations would drive for miles and miles, but no one would inform the authorities that, be careful, these guys are on their way. So it tells you that there is a lot of movement, there is a lot of motion, but it is not towards the right direction in terms of, countering violent extremism within the region. And that brings me to the point, which is that what needs to be done within this region is that, yes, the Nigerian who are affected, like the Malians, like the Burkinabés, like the Nigerians, the Cameroonians, they need to take individual country responsibility. Because, mind you, if you don't have a robust counterterrorism strategy, which is nationally effective, no amount of help outside would really do any good for you. So the onus is on each African country that is affected by jihadist, homegrown and foreign fighters, to come up with a robust strategy. And then let the African Union, be there to help. There is no need for the European Union to go to Africa when there's an African Union. All they need to do is to provide them with the resources that they require, rather than them going there themselves. So I think that is the way forward, Charles.
Okay, and we've just got less than a minute left, and I'll give the last word to you, Air Commodore. President Macron postponing a meeting that he called with the leaders in the region. Is that likely to lead to a rethink of how they approach things? Because the language used by Mr. Macron, which was to summon different African leaders to France to talk about how they should vocalize their support for French military actions in the region, that left a colonial aftertaste.
Well, if they see it as colonial aftertaste, I don't think that in the circumstances they have found themselves, I don't think that would be appropriate now. I think President Macron should reconsider his stand on this, bring them together, whether it's by way of invitation or whatever language you can use to make it possible. But that
because of course the threat remains while you're quibbling about colonial aftertaste.
It's because the capacity of the countries in the Sahel area now it's very low, and any advantage opportunity provided will, to the terrorists will be adequately used, effectively used to deal with them properly. So it's better that the French government continues with, in fact, increase their efforts.
Right.
And international collaboration, very, very important, because there's free movement of terrorists across the countries.
Retired Air Commodore Darlington Abdullahi, Vince Onyekwelu, the safety and security analyst, and of course from our London studios, the international security analyst David Otto. Thank you very much indeed. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja and London. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.